Oh my word. Hello everyone. How are you doing? It has been a couple weeks since I've been away and man, oh man, a guy can't take some time off, right? I mean, look at what just happened. I left a couple weeks ago before the Vegas Grand Prix and I thought, yeah, this is pretty much done and dusted. Lando's going to win and there it is. But the last couple of weeks have just taken their toll on me and so I can't help but be in front of you to just sort of break down what's going on. I left Shez out today because we are going to get tired and we're going to get reckless here. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the Qatar Grand Prix was one where you would have thought that McLaren would have walked out with a 1-2 because they qualified 1-2 and they had the fastest car by every stretch of the imagination. They controlled the whole weekend where Oscar Piastri was quickest in every session, and not just quickest by a mile. I mean, it's one thing to be quickest, but he was just really out there. And so you felt like this was the race that, Piastri was going to be back. And I think all of us, whether you're a Piastri fan or a Lando Norris fan, or maybe even just a general F1 fan, we're really looking forward to Piastri getting back because the last 5-6 races before that has been quite the slump that none of us expected. In fact, one would have argued that after the Dutch Grand Prix, we would have thought that Oscar would have been the one to sew this up, really with maybe 3 or 4 races to spare. That's how dominant McLaren would have been. But they came into this weekend on the heels of the double DSQ in Vegas, which you say, okay, fine, it was an error, whatever, it's done with. We still have a good margin. Let's go and do that. Not worry about it anymore. But they can still seal the Drivers' Championship in Lando's hands. And instead, it feels like they have just lost the plot completely. And I don't know what's more infuriating. Is what they did in the race more infuriating in terms of the strategic miscall, if you want to call it, or it's what they said afterwards and the gestures that have been put on. So let's get into it. So here's what happens. Lando Norris has dropped points he absolutely needed. Oscar Piastri has lost a race he absolutely should have won. And Max Verstappen took another victory, now leveling the two McLaren drivers with 7 wins each. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, you could argue that, Lando could be winning the championship without having won more races than either Max or Oscar. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And it's going to go down as one of the championships that really, if the McLaren drivers win, then most of us will go around saying, wow, that is so undeserved, because time and time again, we've heard this from Max saying, if I were in that McLaren, I would have won it sooner. Most of us in the F1 community believe that a McLaren in the hands of a Charles Leclerc or a George Russell would have been done and dusted a while ago, right? And so the reality is that narrative is there. And for that, and this is what I really want to focus on, Zach Brown is on the verge of having egg all over his face if this Grand Prix, the final Grand Prix, does not go according to plan. He is going to, it's going to feel very, very bad. So this wasn't just a bad race for McLaren. It's really a warning shot to sort of where they've come from, which is this collapse is just quite amazing to think about it. And I've gone back and watched the race a couple of times because I just couldn't believe it. Going into the race, we in the public had heard through media outlets that if there was going to be a pit stop earlier in the race, that every team would take it. And why wouldn't they? Because in Qatar, the FIA come up with this stupidity that is, you have to pit after 25 laps. One of the things we should talk about is the stupidity of that by itself, right? It ended up giving us an exciting race, but not an exciting result, I should say, but not an exciting race because this is the kind of stuff that really sort of screws around with championships. And I'm not saying that because I want Lando to win or Oscar to win or Max to win. As I broke into Tifosi, I'd like for all of them to lose, but that's never really going to happen, right? But the reality is this race on the calendar is arguably the worst race that you could have for this very reason, in that you are forcing teams to pit after 25 laps, and much rather them just kind of put out a warning shot and say, look, the tires are not going to go beyond 25. You do what you want with it, but that's sort of the window, or maybe say between 25 to 30 laps or 20 to 20, just sort of leave a little bit of ambiguity in there. So it creates the atmosphere for some intrigue. Whereas in this case, to be honest, the Qatar safety car on lap 7 was much like what happened in Monaco last year, where that early safety car with the Perez crash really sort of sealed the deal, right? The red flag came out and everyone went on hard tires, essentially. Every one of the front runners, I should say. And then that was it. That's exactly sort of the formula that needed to be applied here. And that when you know you have to make 2 pit stops, right? Because the math of 25 laps per tire set and a 57 lap race requires you to make two pit stops. It is just mind-boggling that McLaren chose not to take the pit stop. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, given that they had the quickest car. So if their whole thing was, well, we can ride it out because we have the quicker car, right? And we're going to make up whatever deficit is in from a regular pit stop to a safety car pit stop, which I think the delta was about 10 or 11 seconds, maybe slightly more. Then why not just take the risk and pit at least one car with the rest of them? And it is just, oh my God, it is frustrating in the sense that even as a neutral Formula One fan, in this case, I want to see a team succeed. I want to see drivers succeed because they did well. I really feel gutted for Piastri because this could have been the race where you could have said, aha, look, he's back and he's got a chance with it, right? So now let's get into this a little bit more, right? Because the McLaren decision is so poor that if you go back and watch the race, everyone pitted right behind them, right? And so they should have pitted, right? That was lap 7, lap 8, right? Because the safety car was still running. You go to lap 16, 17, and that was kind of the window where both McLarens really had to pit because they really had no choice at that point. And you look at the difference in driver standings and the timings, right? You look at Alonso down. There was a DRS train that would have put Lando after his pit stop, I think in around P10 or P11 or maybe even P12, and he would have been stuck there. How do I know that? Just look at the end of the race. Lando could barely make an impression on Antonelli until Antonelli really just couldn't keep the car and he was trying to catch Sainz and he made a mistake. The reality is Lando would not have passed Antonelli, so that you're not telling me that he would have passed the likes of Charles Leclerc down there, even with a poor Ferrari as it was, and being in a DRS train. They had potentially really gone to, Lando would have ended with no points, really. And that sounds funny to say in a sense, but it really isn't funny, right? Because I just don't understand what they're thinking. And I think the worst offense is having made that decision. Zach Brown, to his credit, eagerly walked up to all of the F1 media and said so that, look, we made the wrong call, so on and so forth. Hats off to him for that. But then he went over to Oscar Piastri in the pen to hug him. What? When have you ever seen anything like that happen? I don't even think that Felipe Massa was hugged in the pen after losing a championship in 2008. Like, I mean, there are many other scenarios in which you could think that would happen. I do not understand why he needed to do that. It almost feels like there's something happening behind the scenes that really required Zach to make that public gesture. And by the way, I'm sure the gesture would have been, in complete honesty and complete sincerity. I don't want to question that, but we do know that Zach is quite the smart operator, and we do know that the Piastri camp is really, really upset with Zach and the team for everything that's happened, Monza and beyond. I mean, Kim Illman put out, a whole video and talked about how the Piastri cam was just giving Zach Brown the icy sort of side eye look at the end in their own hospitality section, because they were just completely upset. And really, you have to feel bad for Piastri because he really put together a stellar weekend, and the Piastri of old, if you will, was back and really just couldn't be there. Now think about it this way. McLaren have opened the door on a Max Verstappen 5-time championship, and I think we're all here for that. I think the F1 community, if you poll them by large, I think 95% and above are going to say that they would really like to see that happen. And McLaren have no one but themselves to blame. I, for one, have defended their papaya rules to some extent, which is when him and I have had these discussions in the past, and that I have thought of it as generally a good idea, a sort of an honorable way to go about racing. And I've argued the fact that, look, every team can have their formula for success. They can do things their own way. McLaren have certainly earned the right to do things their own way because they built a car that's fast winning, it's fast going rather, and winning, right? But evidently only has won, 14 out of the 21 or 22 races that have happened, right, thus far. But they've really allowed themselves for that to happen in a way that should be allowed. Like if that's how they want to do it, if they want to play fair play to both drivers, give them both an equal chance, then that's cool. But what they did in Qatar does not make any sense, because even if the theory, and by the way, this is not a theory. If you read what Andrea Sella, or listen to what Andrea Sella said at the end of the race, he kind of let the cat out of the bag. He said that they didn't want to double stack because that would disadvantage Lando Norris. And oh my God, my head is hurting with that. Like, Andrea Stella, what are you doing? Piastri outqualified Lando, so he should have had the benefit of having whatever strategy he wanted ahead of Lando. I mean, that's been their formula for the whole season, right? What happened? Did they just decide to bail on that, right? And then even if you do the math on double stacking, which would have been the ideal thing to do, yes, Lando would have been further behind. I mean, Russell lost positions too, right? So we know that could have happened, but he would have been in the mix for the next pit stop to have some flexibility in terms of where he pitted to. So they could have done something where he could have shown the pace of his car. By the way, Lando was pretty quick in his second stint, so he could have had a chance there. And the reality is, Piastri could have won. I mean, that's the difference. And one of the thoughts was that pitting Piastri would have disadvantaged him because the gap to the folks behind wasn't big enough. In fact, if you look at the data, the gap was large enough for Piastri to have come in front. Norris finished fourth in the end, right? Max won the race. Piastri came second. Had McLaren double stacked them, most likely Piastri would have won. Max would have come second. And maybe Lando finishes fourth where he was exactly. Maybe he gets onto the podium. Maybe he's fifth. I tell you what, though, if you go and do the math, Lando would have had a bigger lead coming into Abu Dhabi with that scenario than he does now. Because he would have been able to keep Max behind. It would have been Oscar who would have been closer to him than Max. And by the way, McLaren as a team should have wanted that, because at the end of the day, they want to give they say they want to give both their drivers the chance to win the championship equally. So why not give Oscar the benefit? And worst case, because Oscar was behind anyway, he would have been between the two drivers, the two McLaren drivers. And I just don't understand what they're doing. What they're doing now is what resembles what Ferrari have done in the past. I mean, it was sort of funny watching the two McLarens sort of not pitting and going around, right? And all I could think of is this is the kind of stuff that Ferrari does, except that they haven't given themselves a chance to do this in 2025. But I think you'll go back in 23, 24, 22, even before, you will see that Ferrari pull off these blunders of pit stops that McLaren now seem to have caught that disease. By the way, McLaren did a lot of this last year too. Think back to Silverstone last year too. This was the stuff that McLaren did that was head scratching in a way that has sort of come back. So I hate to say this, but if a McLaren driver does not win, Zach Brown has egg all over his face, because when he said that quote earlier, was it a couple weeks ago, when he said, well, I wouldn't mind Max Verstappen winning if in fact we were fair to both of our drivers, and if Max won, so be it. I don't think he really meant that in this way. I don't think he meant that in the way that this would play out. I think what he meant was that if the two McLaren drivers are fighting each other and in the process lose places, then that's cool with me. That's so be it. I think that if McLaren loses the World Drivers' Championship, this is going to feel bad. I mean, think about it. McLaren have won the Constructors' Championship weeks ago, but they're going to walk away at the end of the season nothing but absolutely unequivocally sad, because this would be a choke job the likes of which I've never seen before. And by the way, this would not be on either of the drivers. Let's just clarify that. No matter what you think of Norris, and I know there's plenty of folks in the F1 community that do not like Norris. Cool. That's your point. That's your point, right? The reality is that Norris has been nothing but amazing. Even in Vegas, when he got beat by Max, he sort of bottled the start, if you want to call it. He still came in P2. That was fine. That was completely okay. And even that, if there was no double DSQ, that could have helped him just as much. So you really think back to these last two weekends, and McLaren are really doing a really poor job of making sure that either of their drivers win. And I think they're going to look back and recognize that papaya rules, in theory, as an overarching philosophy, are fine. But their way of executing it is just absolutely poor, because even in the times where they have tried to be fair, the perception is that they have been unfair, aka Monza, right? The reality is that they need to ask themselves this fundamental question. When push comes to shove, who are we going to support? And there has to be a time and place in which you have to get behind one driver. And I would argue after Brazil, it would have been Lando Norris. There should have been a thing there saying, we have to sort of back this driver up. Now, unfortunately for them, they had the double DSQ. So, maybe this stuff wouldn't have happened had they been able to hang on to that race, because those results would have actually done Lando pretty good. He would have been out of Max's range. Oh, sorry, Max would have been out of his range had Lando been able to keep his points from Vegas. So some of it is just down to, I guess, bad luck for the drivers. But the reality is that McLaren are doing a poor job of executing on what they believe are fairness rules, or as they like to call it, papaya rules, right? So I think that this is going to be an exciting weekend. Look, Abu Dhabi last year, Lando flew away into the distance. I don't even think we saw him. I think he was like 15, 17 seconds ahead and won the race very comfortably. Tell me if you think that that's going to happen this time. Even though on paper you would think that Lando has the advantage, or maybe at worst Piastri has this advantage. Tell me if you think that. I cannot tell you sitting up here saying, oh wow, well this seems like an obvious thing. They should be a slam dunk for Abu Dhabi. I don't know. I mean, just based on the last few races, I feel like because those butts are so tight in McLaren, right? Whether it's getting the car set up wrong in Vegas, or whether it's strategy. I mean, they've given us two flavors of the same distasteful ice cream that they're now going to have to eat. It is going to be the most tense race that they've ever had in their lifetimes, because I'm sure they came into this season thinking by the time Abu Dhabi comes around, we're going to have fun there. It's going to be a massive celebration. We're going to have this thing wrapped up so quickly, right? And as they did with the Constructors' Championship, they would have thought the same with the Drivers' Championship, or at least it would have been down to the two McLaren drivers, which either way does not matter. By the way, one more thing on this papaya rule thing before I move on to the next topic. Those of you that have kids will realize this. Papaya rules are sort of put together to instill a philosophy of fairness, right? It's you want to be fair. You don't want to penalize one driver, because the other one did something wrong to them, right? That's sort of the idea, the don't touch, right? Or you want to try to be fair in general and try to give equal opportunity or equity. And I should remind you that if you have kids, you have been through this, particularly the kids that are closer in age, where I have two of them. There's one always saying why the other one gets to do X, Y, Z and I don't, right? And it kind of feels like McLaren are in that zone where they are indirectly, unconsciously, subconsciously, consciously, whatever you want to call it, they are creating issues that should not exist, because they look to be favoring one driver or the other. It's pretty clear that they look like they're favoring Norris, even if they're not wanting to. They look like it. And the other guy in Piastri, who they've fought so hard to kind of have on the team, is clearly unhappy. So I don't understand why they cannot set clear boundaries and say, look, we're only going to apply papaya rules as it comes to a very narrow thing, which is essentially coming down to the two of you cannot bump into each other, cannot take each other out, period, end of story. Otherwise, there's stuff happening in the race. We are here to support both of you. We're going to be competitive within the team. Sometimes there might be a bad pit stop. Sometimes there might be a bad strategic call. It is what it is. Whoever qualifies ahead gets dibs at the strategic call, and that's it. What happens, happens. Because this idea of micromanaging every single thing is only going to create more problems, because just like when you have kids, no matter how fair you try to be, the perception is that you're favoring the sibling. It always happens. So please, McLaren, if you make it through this weekend somehow and win the race, first of all, it's only going to feel like a deep sigh and a deep level of stress off your shoulders, more than even joy, right? And it's going to feel like, we finally got through it. Once you get through that, please come back with a better version of papaya rules. I'm not against the idea of having papaya rules, but to do it this way is just poor execution, and that should not happen again. All right. There's another sort of mini breaking news item, if you will. I wouldn't really call it a news item, but sort of interesting. Ben Vinyl of the Motorsport put this out there. I'm sure Lewis Hamilton said this to the media in general, so I'm not sure who the original source was, but I'm referencing the motorsport.com article where Lewis Hamilton says the media negativity has taken its toll on the Ferrari F1 squad. And oh my God, my head is hurting with all things Ferrari, right? So I'm going to read through here and say Lewis Hamilton says media criticism has taken a toll on members of Ferrari's Formula One team. He goes on to say that, although the team was cautious publicly in setting up goals for 2025, I don't agree. Expectations were high after, they came P2 in the constructors last year just by 14 points. They were one Carlos Sainz accident away from winning it all, right? And the reality is that Ferrari are nowhere to be found. So Hamilton says the negativity that's constantly within the media and everything like that affects them being the team, and the engineers and the I guess the mechanics and all of that. He says they get home to their wives and their wives say they've been saying this about you where you work, and I'm sure that's tough, and the kids and all those things. So there's a huge effect on lots of people, right? And okay, right. So then his Lewis Hamilton's comments were sort of reference to Fred Vasseur, and he insisted that the squad needed to stay focused, which is what Fred Vasseur says. He always says this. I think we just need to calm down and focus on our job, and things will get better. And he is. Fred is about as candid as it seems like he is allowed to be, right? Every time I watch Fred he says some flavor of that, right? We understand that the margins are thin. We understand that we didn't do a good job. We also need to calm down, focus, and not worry about this, that, and that, and that, and all of that. And that the results are going to come. And we understand that this is Ferrari and the expectations are high. You notice this. This is exactly sort of the theme of what he can say. And I just feel like when I listen to Fred, it feels like he's got so much within him that he wants to say freely that he cannot. And rumors are, by the way, that Fred Vasseur is not going to have past April to sort of prove how this goes. So what that translates into is 3 races, maybe 4 races for Ferrari to do a good job. And if you are to believe some of the rumors and some of the things that the drivers have said and read really closely into it, mostly conjecture, but it doesn't feel like Ferrari are going to have a very competitive car, at least to start the rule set. The only question, of course, is because it is a new rule set, you just don't know how everyone else is doing. And so therefore, at least in theory, there's a chance, right? But so these comments are just crazy, Shez and I have argued a lot about Lewis Hamilton's season. I call it a failure. I call this Lewis Hamilton season a failure purely because I was not one that expected Lewis Hamilton to win a championship. No, far from it. I think I pretty much said at the beginning. I mean, Lewis is not in for a championship this year, but I really believe that he could be part of a championship winning team and an active contributor to a team that finished P2 last year. And that on paper at least looked like they could fight for the constructor championship, if not the driver's championship, right? And the reality is that the team has bottled it far more than Lewis, right? I mean, if you were to do a pie chart of blame, I would say about 80% of that is on the team. It really is. And in the team, I include everybody from Vasseur down onto engineers and pit stop crews. And I mean, Elkan talks about the mechanics doing their job, and just look at the videos from Qatar when Lewis is boxing and they don't seem to be ready. So I don't know what the hell Elkan's talking about. By the way, that 80% of the blame, I put 40% of that on Elkan, right? He is largely responsible for this. He needs to take responsibility for it, because all he does is put out comments and, flattery statements and whatnot. That's not going to do it, right? He needs to really give Fred a chance to succeed. But it does look like Fred is not going to get, a big long leash, even though he just signed a contract. And contracts in Formula One mean absolutely nothing, right? And the word is Ferrari are still sort of flirting around with Christian Horner. And given the fact that Newey has taken over a team principal at Aston Martin, it seems likely that Christian Horner will be in the mix for a Ferrari position should that become open, right? So much like the Red Bull second seat, Ferrari don't mind hitting reset, like whenever that happens, right? But let me get back to what Lewis said, right? Which is this whole idea of there's too much negativity in the media that sort of goes on there. Now, I'm going to guess that a lot of this was sort of scrutinizing the Italian media, which have been really, really bad. And some of the Italian media outlets are effectively run by John Elkann himself, right? Um, I do want to kind of add that Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, to some extent, are not without blame. I mean, just look at their comments from the last 2 or 3 weeks. They too have commented on the fact that it just feels like a bad car. And I'm not here to blame them for saying that, right? They are completely within their right to say whatever the hell they want to say. Like, who am I or anyone else to say what these drivers should say? But one of the things that Elkann pointed out that made some sense to me, if you can make some sense of his comments, is that drivers just need to drive and not say anything, right? I'm not okay with telling anybody, particularly a driver of the legendary status that Lewis Hamilton is, to shut up and drive. But I do think we can tell him to drive better. And I think that there is something about that as well, which is that Lewis Hamilton has not managed to do anything with the Ferrari this season. I know many of you are going to come and tell me, yes, he has a sprint win, but let's just be honest, guys. That was a fluky result for the team. That should have been Oscar Piastri's win. McLaren screwed up with their setup, which again, they've done a couple of times since then, right? So this is not new, but the reality is the Ferrari never deserved to be there. And if you thought the sprint win was great, look at just what happened in the race. I'm talking about the results, not even the DSQ that came afterwards, right? So let's just be honest. Lewis Hamilton has not given the kind of results that would give you a little bit of a spark. I am not saying he should have won multiple races. I am not saying he should have been in qualifying in podium positions every race. But good God, can there be something in a race, in a full race, that resembles something like, okay, yes, we feel good about that. The only thing he's really had is P3 in Mexico. That's it. And that's where he started. And then even that race was a disaster. Yes, we can argue the penalties and all of that stuff, but the reality is there's been no race where you felt like, wow, okay, Lewis Hamilton is in the mix. Wow, this is going to be a good result, even if it's outside of the podium. It just has not felt that way. I know I'm not pulling up a data chart like Shez would and do super times and all that. I am completely fine with the way that the charts explain results, right? I do not have a problem with explaining why Lewis Hamilton's results at Ferrari have been less than underwhelming, right? And if you can even go beyond that, right? That explains it. What that does not explain is that now you have a 7-time champion that has struggled with this rule set in a way that's pretty epic. I mean, it's no wonder that Lewis is criticizing this generation of cars, talking about them not being able to overtake each other, which is fine in and of itself. But it's also not the kind of thing he would be saying if he were leading in a world championship or fighting for one. So there's a little bit of a glass half empty, glass half full scenario too. And the thing that I keep arguing about with Shez all the time is that I just expected Lewis Hamilton to turn up with an odd victory or with an odd pole position. None of that has happened. Do you know that Ferrari were closest to winning which race? Take a guess. Take a guess. No, it's not the race in Hungary where Charles qualified P1, because you know that was the race that Lyco revealed itself and that he fell off the podium through no fault of his own. He was leading the first part of the race. You really felt like he had a chance to, God forbid, secure a victory, but at least be on the podium. But he fell off the race because they had to Lyco their way through the rest of it. So he was a P4 then. The reality was the only race that Ferrari had a chance to win was in Monza. And you could tell when you looked at Charles's face, because he qualified P2 and he knew that that was it. Given the fact that Ferrari decided to abandon the development of this car in favor for the 2026 car, a high-risk move that only Ferrari can pull off. That's kind of what you got, right? So I am not saying that Lewis Hamilton should have produced podiums after podiums after podiums or been there. But good God, how can your teammate qualify, in the top 5 or top 6, and there are times where you're not making it out of Q3? I mean, can we not expect better than that? Could we not have had him be in Q3 these last few races where he's not managed to pull out? And Charles managed to do that. So super times and difference between drivers explains itself. And I get the fact that we are in an era where everybody's split by very narrow and thin margins. God, you would have liked to see at least a signature moment or two. We haven't had that. So the best thing we have really is that sprint win and all of the negative comments. So no wonder the media are also being negative, because that's what they're hearing. And I'll just say this finally for Lewis Hamilton. I'm rooting for success in 2026, but he's the one that said that he's not looking forward to 2026. Now I know you'll come back and say, well, he said that in a moment of frustration. But why say that about 2026? If you want to talk about 2025, fair enough. I get it. We're all, Team Tifosi is all about ending the season as quickly as possible, really, to be honest. But if he says that about 2026, then what is the media supposed to run with? So my point is, he is a key contributor in this negativity as well. He needs to realize this. I'm not saying that he's being facetious and that he's doing it on purpose, but he is contributing to it, and he has to take accountability for that. Finally, you look everywhere this season for Lewis Hamilton, and he's getting beat by everyone. He's getting beat by his own teammate by handy margins. Not what you would have expected. I would have expected Charles to beat Lewis this season, but not quite in the way. I mean, the qualifying statistic is way out of whack, and the reality is you could just do how many Q1 appearances versus Q3 appearances, and you'll find that difference is mind-boggling as well. You look at the guy he replaced at Ferrari, who's gotten 2 podiums now. Say what you want. It's flukish, blah, blah, blah. But Williams told you at the beginning of the season that they're not even worried about 2025. They're building on 26, so they had given up on that. Whereas Ferrari came into this season with hopes of having at least a Constructors' Championship and being in the mix for a World Drivers' Championship. That's the level of difference. Lewis Hamilton is a 7-time champion. Carlos Sainz is only a multiple race winner. So look at that. The guy he replaced is doing well at Williams. The guy who replaced him at Mercedes has gotten a couple of podiums, looks like every bit of the talent that he's supposed to be. Yes, he's mistake prone. Yes, the racecraft isn't quite there, but good God, he's a high schooler. He's just graduated high school, in fact. So he's only going to get better with time, right? So you look at that. You also look at his past teammate, who's got multiple wins this season as well. And by the way, beat him when he was at Mercedes as well as the new guy. So all in all, I'm not here to say that Lewis Hamilton is washed and any of that. There's none of that. But the reality is that this rule set for Lewis has been a failure, and you can only hope what 2026 will be better. But I will also say that if 2026 is going to be better for him, he is also going to be stacked up against a new generation of drivers that just seem to be able to handle this generation of car very, very well. So I, for one, cannot be very optimistic about his chances of winning an 8th. Sincerely hope that he does, and will root for him in every way, shape, or form. But I really just hope that when Lewis looks at his own comments, right, and he has been harsh on himself, I hope that he realizes that whereas being candid is amazing in every other world, in Tifosi land, it's just not. So far be it from me to be his PR person, but you kind of reap what you sow. And that's what you're getting from Lewis Hamilton. All right, Abu Dhabi Grand Prix this coming weekend. I firmly believe that Oscar Piastri will win the race and yet lose the championship. That's all I can say. That's how I feel about it. I feel like Oscar needs to win, and I think he will. He will put on his best show. He will be a man driven and upset in ways that we cannot imagine. I think he will outmax Max too, because I genuinely believe that he's had a really good season and he's on the ascent, and he is one of the incoming champions, if not this year, next year or beyond. It will happen. So I really believe, and to some extent want Oscar to win the race, regardless of how the rest of this play out. So there's my prediction for the race. Oscar wins. Tell me what you think. As always, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We read every single one and we reply to as many of them as we can. Shez and I will be back. Lots to talk about Abu Dhabi and thereafter. See y'all soon. Take it easy.